a choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a rock.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expanding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality. Welcome to the 200th episode of Expanding Reality. On this incredibly special episode, we have featuring Dave Zed in studio, Crow 777, Human Vibration, Dr. Dan Winter, and Elizabeth Donavan. Now, guys, this conversation needs no intro, so we're not going to give it one. Without any further ado, let's get to it. The 200th episode of Expanding Reality. All right, welcoming everybody to the 200th. That's right, I said it. 200th episode of Expanding Reality. This is an incredible meeting of the most powerful entities we have available to us right now. And I am absolutely grateful for everyone's participation in this. We're going to allow Elizabeth in here on the fly as we're chatting here. So to my right here, we have Dave Zed in studio with us. We have Human Vibration joining us, Dr. Dan Winter, as well as Crow 777. Elizabeth, as I said, is going to be joining us as well. And then we have our cat, Sam, here. Samurai, that's what that's short for. So he'll be joining us as well. I cannot thank you, entities, enough for being here with us. The topic for the 200th episode of Expanding Reality will be, what is real? What is real?
That's a deep one, yeah.
It's a deep one and remarkably subjective, as we will find out here. So if you don't mind, let's run it around the room. All of you need no introductions, but let's, for shits and gigs, let's just do it anyhow. Now, Human Vibration, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you don't mind, young lady, introduce yourself. I believe you're on. That's okay.
I was muted. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for having me. Human vibration. This is my favorite topic. This is reality and our experience within it, what it is, how we experience it. Oh God, that is just a topic of endless fascination of mine. So thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I'm pretty much on Twitter as an introduction, Twitter and Insta. I explore this very thing, the subjective nature of reality and all the inputs that we are given over a lifetime, over our whole lifetime, cradle to grave, cognitive conditioning, all melds together to kind of disrupt our understanding of reality and kind of morph it in ways. So this is just a fascinating conversation. I look forward to hearing what everybody else says. Do you want me to go into, once I start talking, it's hard to stop. So we might as well go around with the introductions.
Let's do the round with introductions and then we're going to kick it off with you. Is that fair?
Sounds great.
Okay. As well, we'd like to welcome Elizabeth to our panel as well. Elizabeth, if you don't mind introducing yourself for the audience. Hi.
Sure. I've been schooled in electrical engineering and physics, and I did a lot of reading as far as metaphysics and cosmology, that sort of thing. I have a book out. It's now called Quantum Horizons, and it's a lot of it's speculation, but some of it's about suppressed technologies as well, like anti-gravity, free energy, that sort of thing. And then I also evaluate different inventors' devices, and I test them, and I do consultancies for different people, and just troubleshooting things and giving them ideas and helping whenever I can. So that's about it.
If I could just say very quickly, Elizabeth is an absolute genius. Just to say, I just want to bring that up first and foremost. Thanks to both Elizabeth and Dan, there's a lot of things that if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't know, have learned many, many things. So Elizabeth is an absolute genius. So I just want to throw that out there.
Elizabeth is one of the world's leading electrical engineers in nonlinear physics and longitudinal physics and all that.
Well, beyond grave, this is a surprise guest for me, actually. So thank you. This is a gift from Dave Zed and Dan. Dr. Dan, if you don't mind, Dave.
Oh, I'm the host of the Generation Z podcast. I'm just going to leave it at that because I want everyone else to introduce themselves. So,
and then to be fair, all the ways to find everyone will be located down in the show description. So absolutely check that out. Crow 777, if you don't mind, sir.
Hi, I'm Crow. Excuse me. Everyone calls me Crow. You can find my work exclusively at crow777radio.com. I bailed from social media for obvious reasons years ago. I do have social media accounts, but they all just point to my website where we maintain free speech.
Absolutely. It's outstanding. Thank you so much again for joining us, brother. Dr. Dan Winter, nice to meet you and see you. And thank you again for joining us, sir. For the audience, not too familiar, brother.
Hi, I'm Dan Winter. Most of you know me, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com. All of my work is based on the implosion and centripetal forces in what's called the fractal field, literally. And the technologies, Therify.net, plasma tech in 25 countries, flameandmind.com, implosive brainwave biofeedback, theimploder.com, implosion in water and related technologies. My fifth new book just released, plankfire.com, PLANCK, PHIRE, plankfire.com, is based on the simple premise that charge collapse is the cause of gravity, consciousness, and all negentropic forces, including life force itself. And this is behind all of the technologies we speak of, including what we're doing with Dave, which has to do with implosion into longitudinal arrays and the physics of gravity technologies, and fun stuff I think we're about to talk about.
And if I may say one, before we continue on, Dan is also a genius in his own right and in his own field as well. So, and I really do mean that. So in other words, this, I would personally put them right up, both Elizabeth and Dan right up there with people like Max Planck and Albert Einstein, but that's just me. So.
Beyond, actually, those were building blocks for you, sir, because you're far more intuitive and unbound. And I appreciate that. And that's why you're here. HV, we had started kicking off on something here and we pulled back in to introduce everyone. So please rise like the phoenix. Turn loose, darling.
So reality, I think my favorite quote on reality is from The Truman Show, where Christoph states so bluntly and perfectly that we accept the reality of the world with which we are presented. It's as simple as that. We are shown a version of reality and told it is true and told it is real. And from what I have found with a lot of my discoveries and curiosities is neither of those are accurate. But we are presented with false inputs all day, every day, and told they are real. And so our ability to discern what is real is reprogrammed. And we use a now false logic board. Our logic and our reasoning that we are born with, I think, is good. And then over time, that is rewritten and reprogrammed by every societal input of modern life. And we lose the capacity to really discern for ourselves, to feel, to intuit, to know what is real and what is true. And it's an exploration that I think is approachable on many levels. Even on some of like the kind of the ground floor. Right now there's a tsunami of AI, of generative and just these extraordinarily robust neural network systems, generative AI that can present us anything we wish to see. And I think that that has always existed. The capacity for this type of technology has always been there. The foundation has always been there, and the application and the practice, whether or not we were aware of it, is a whole other conversation. But I do think it's really interesting that we are now living in the time where it is at the forefront of what is real and what is unreal. And I don't have the answer to what is reality with a capital R. A lot of speculation, but I do know that here on the ground level, from where I stand, the news is not real. Even down to the weather reports, like it's all projections and it's all programming that we take in, and we accept it. We just accept everything that we are told. And I'm using we as like the we as in humanity. Everyone in this group I know has a lot more ability to discern, but as a collective, I do believe we struggle ultimately with being able to know what is true. And I think that's the biggest deception. And is, I like to say whoever they is, their most powerful and practical tool is deception. Deception is the biggest weapon that we are up against. And we encounter it all day, every day, in ways, small and enormous. And everything, even down to the human body. We don't even know how our body works. We don't know how, we can't explain, we can't explain the processes to which we exist within. How are we supposed to explain or understand the processes that are outside of us as well? It's just really interesting. I can't wait to hear. I'm going to stop talking because you guys can go search human vibration on reality. I talk about it all the time, but I'm here to learn today. So I can't wait to hear what everybody else says.
Outstanding. Thank you.
I'm good in terms of with respects to what reality is in that regard. Well, this is interesting because this is where usually Dan, Elizabeth, and myself tend to kind of bounce off of each other. So if I may, actually, I'd like to hand my time over to Dan, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, this is just an open forum as well. It's not an interview per se. Let's just absolutely go for it. If you're intuitively called to say something, please feel free to step in. And absolutely, and you're not censored in any way here. Everybody know that.
If I may say as well, Dan, if there's anything perhaps that not to put you on the spot, if there's anything that you would perhaps like to present or anything of that sort, I would very kindly encourage it, only because that implosion to Planck point seems to substantiate much of what everyone is trying to understand here. And I think that that's something we can touch upon. So I'd like to hand my time to Dan.
And actually, ahead of a presentation, Crow, if you don't mind commenting before we get into the presentation, is that okay?
Sure. Now, what is real? Is that where we're going? I'm
curious about what you feel real is. Yeah.
That is a very broad question, and it is clear that we live in an illusory place. But what is real? Love is real. Compassion is real. Our ability to detect that we're living in an illusory place is real. I always say that there is no lie in nature, but how we perceive that can also be illusory. I liked that HV brought up Christoph. Our ability to detect that what Christoph is telling us is not true is real. The whole AI thing is going to open up the illusory world that we live in. It's almost magical. And when you consider the things that we've already known, like consider the wisdom of the crowd or the law of large numbers, and then you begin to comprehend what AI is actually going to be able to pull off. It reminds me of what was written in the 1950s in the Dune series, where they briefly mention a thing called a Butlerian jihad. And the Butlerian jihad, the whole idea of it was there was this galaxy-wide, universal-wide war about thinking machines. And it stunned me, because how could someone in the 50s have been aware, of where we are now, where this is coming to the fore? But to get back to what is real, there are no lies in nature, but the way we experience it is illusory. What is real is our ability to get beyond the illusion. But at the base of everything for me, love is real.
If I may say, to actually create a springboard for Dan before Dan jumps off, is that something that I've recently been exploring in my spare time as I've been traveling, is the idea of, for example, when someone delves into what's called space-time metric engineering, which would be basically, manipulating or engineering the fabric of this reality, so to speak. It's been proposed and hypothesized that there have been cases that have been studied over the many years when it comes to UFOs, UAP, whatever we would like to call them, where, for example, the craft, right before it's about to take off, if it is next to any trees or plants or anything like this, the surrounding plants and trees substantially age a lot quicker as the craft is beginning to build up its resonance and take off. And now the proposal behind that, officially the word would be called senescence, but the proposal behind that is because the craft is creating a longitudinal array that is tuned to Planck, of which I'll let Dan, of course, speak on, because that's his field, knows much better than myself, where essentially the craft is generating a vortex-like spiral that generates its own inertial 0 point in time. And so that quick spiral makes time accelerate a lot quicker, and therefore the surrounding plants right before the craft is about to take off age a lot quicker. And the point I'm trying to make here is to correlate it to Dan's tune to Planck concept, but also to what Crow 777 had just said so eloquently, which is that it's interesting to see that even the plants themselves, assuming this example is legitimate, perceive the aging of time and have to go through that in that same regard. So there's this perception element that doesn't always even require the human eye, let's say. But with that said, I think that Dan's work certainly not just puts the icing on the cake, but arguably bakes the whole cake. So Dan, please.
Let's bake a cake. You have the ability to share, sir, if you'd like as well.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I think it's very relevant what Dave is saying. So the reason the plants and trees accelerate aging is essentially they accelerate turning inside out rate. So, of course, time is only a name for relative rotation rate only. But relative rotation rate is actually a name for the rate at which you turn recursively inside out, literally implode, which also that centripetal force is the definition of life and consciousness. And that, I think, sets a beautiful context for this conversation of what is real. Why is what is real happening inside you more real than what's happening inside AI? And there's a very specific answer to that. And the answer is that living plasma will never turn inside out recursively and have a soul inside an artificial machine. It cannot happen. What we're calling a soul is the implosive turning inside out of living plasma that touches recursively that Planck-tuned central point, literally the longitudinal array, sometimes called the collective unconscious. And the ability to touch that point requires literally grounding, which is phase locked to Planck by fractality. And so getting grounded literally makes your life real. Like, are you in phase with Planck and Schumann? And if you're in a metal building full of electrosmog, you're probably not, which means quite literally you're less real. And so what Gurdjieff, famous book, Life is Real Only Then When I Am, actually points to the definition of self-awareness biblically, Eher, Esher, Eir, which is I am that I am. And what that means, it means literally the ability to turn inside out, implode recursively. And with that, I would do the share screen. So my book, plankfire.com, PLANCKPHIRE, takes this physics, which is called charge collapse. Agreeably, everyone agrees charge collapse is the cause of gravity and the cause of consciousness. I, for the first time, have defined the cause of charge collapse, therefore the cause of gravity and consciousness, which is implosion by golden ratio multiples times Planck. And basically, then we describe consciousness and turning inside out. And the visual we like to use to teach that is the recursive turning inside out, obviously, that happens inside your mind when you implode and have bliss. And that recursive turning inside out in I am that I am creates a point of consumed perspective, literally grounding or phase lock at the turn inside out point, which not only is that the consumed perspective point, but it's literally the point at which you enter, for example, a stargate. So to understand how we make that connection to reality, ray resonance, is the phase lock to Planck called grounding. All grounding is access to fractality for electricians and psychologists. And if we measure that cascade that enables that implosion to Planck in brain waves, you have a golden ratio cascade here in blue and an octave cascade in pink. And that defines the moment when the young people see without their eyes. And they say a vortex opened inside their head and they can see through it. It's an eyeball. And that is awareness. That is grounding. And that is what will never happen inside AI. And then if you take that literally measurably to higher amplitude, the same brainwave cascade here in Jean-Charles Moyen, seconds before he bilocated with many witnesses documented multiple times, the physics of his bilocation was measured with the same golden ratio plus octave cascade, which is literally a set of tensors, harmonic tensors in the brainwave, looks like this. So inside your brain, there's a double vortex, pine cones kissing noses, and it's imploding tuned to Planck to that central array, the compression array, called the longitudinal array. And that cascade, here's 5 harmonics in golden ratio. That some people say, well, it was gamma frequency that enabled bilocation and lucid dreaming, but actually it's not the gamma alone. It's a cascade all the way from gamma to alpha. It's literally a harmonic series that's what's called phase conjugation, imploding to Planck.
So if I may say, multiple energies would be phase locking then.
Yes,
right.
Yes, exactly. And that then leads us to, the physics of gravity. So, which is the subject Dave had maybe some questions about later. But yes. So if we look at that cascade here on the bottom right in Schauberger's piezo vortex, and Charlie Zeiss mapped the angle, the 76-degree angle, which is the peak of the Russian and the base of the Egyptian pyramids, enables golden ratio cascading to implode through Planck. And what that does is it pushes out a longitudinal wave at the center, squeezed through the wormhole, the nozzle of the squirt gun, which is Planck dimension, tuned to hydrogen. And that squeezing of transverse out through longitudinal at the tip of the squirt gun is the physics of gravity waves and all action at a distance, and what makes plants grow, because only centripetal forces enable plants growth. And obviously the transverse wave is never centripetal, only the longitudinal component, which is the compressional, where the direction of wave propagation is parallel to the direction of propagation of longitudinal. And when the longitudinal waves implode, you have the possibility to spit out longitudinal wave, which means a way out for charge through center, defining non-destructive collapse, and therefore defining the origin of consciousness and gravity when there is a way out for charge through center. And that's why these devices made gravity, obviously. And thanks to Elizabeth Donavan here and our team, we actually plotted the angle at which you could turn that spiral on the torus to optimize the amount of gravity you made by imploding. So it's not a coincidence that.
Sorry, if I may say very quickly, if I may say, for those that are more interested in looking into Dan's work further, this can all be substantiated by a handful of individuals in the past, especially people like, for example, Richard Feynman, who had discussed that, for example, and I believe Elizabeth would agree here, and Dan as well, that the del cross operator or the dot nabla symbol would enable for the tensor metric to start to turn and become nonlinear. So that's what it. Yes. It's
the screwing down the squirt gun. The final thought in that series was that's why Tom Bearden called that longitudinal interferometry, which he proved by equation is what gravity waves are made of. And the reason plants grow, the longitudinal interferometry, is also the physics of all action at a distance. You embed in that array the physics of how Jean-Charles bilocated with many witnesses. We measured the brainwave signature, and the entrance embedding in that array is the only definition of reality. I'm done.
My God.
Well, that was Dan. Thank you so much. That was incredible. Brandon,
Yep. So let's tie it to how we perceive. Let's tie it to what is actionable in the understandings that we just got that are fascinating, man, and blowing my mind in all ways, because now it's tying to gravity. Now it's tying to UFOs. Now it ties to everything, which is reality. And this is what you talk about with the phenomena, that it's all connected. You discover that, you discover time travel, interdimension. It's all there because it's everything. And the I am that I am perfectly surmises what you're limited to is what you're capable of. And so you remove limitations with understandings and awarenesses and conversations like this, which is what lights me up to no other. So let's talk about combining this understanding with the way that we perceive reality. So Elizabeth, can you bridge the gap between what we just understood and some examples in our everyday life that we can see?
Oh, Elizabeth,
I think you're muted. Yeah. You're just going off over there and we're like,
okay. So, going back to the aging of the trees, that's kind of interesting too, because, time flow is also a longitudinal wave phenomenon. So if you start tampering with that, you can also tamper with the flow of time. So that's another thing. So if the craft is not so much a spacecraft as something traveling in both space and time, or primarily in time, and I did a chapter on that, practical time travel. that was an interesting exercise. But anyway, what it comes down to is that when the craft begins accelerating, then you're going to see a redshifting phenomena going on. So it'll just keep going redshifting until it just disappears, but it's still there.
If I could say,
right, it's moving in the time axis.
Right. If I could say very quickly, what's interesting that I find that I would like to add to, if it wasn't for Dan and Elizabeth, I wouldn't have come across this line of thought whatsoever. So the thanks goes to you guys. I stand on the shoulders of you guys. If you look, for example, at the human DNA strand, they talk about how there's the red strand and the blue strand. I find it very interesting and peculiar that the same way that they say there's a blue shift and or a red shift with the craft, it makes me think that there's that the gravity waves that are emitting from the craft are not only longitudinal, but they propagate in the same vortex-like array, in the same spiral-like fashion that our DNA is comprised of. So the gravity wave would be perhaps, I'm oversimplifying here, but a nuts and bolts version of something that we already have in our DNA.
And that's the thing, is that there are a lot of examples of what's called the cavity structure effect here, where insects, bees shouldn't be able to fly the way that they do. Barvinikov, absolutely. Yeah. Flew that thing around, but it looked like something different to everyone who was zooming over with this thing.
Right.
So it seems accessible in nature, which again, nature is true. Like Crow said, no flaws in nature. Crow, have you heard of this guy, Dr. Barvinikov, this Russian scientist that taped a bunch of, I'm going to reduce the hell out of it, but taped a bunch of bug wings together and flew around like a UFO?
I don't think I am.
Cavity structure effect. It's fat.
The physics is actually surprisingly simple, and it builds nicely on what is Elizabeth Donovan's excellent book, originally called Glimpses of Epiphany, and now has a new title, a version at fractalfield.com/propulsion, thanks to Elizabeth Donovan here. But in that book, primarily, he deals with the double helix of a quartz helix in what was called a Koski-Frost device, which made 800 times its own weight in gravity. The point was that it was a phase conjugate pump wave, which is that golden ratio cascade, exactly what the Schumann harmonic infrasound is. And when you put that phase conjugate pump wave on that helix, obviously the metaphor of your DNA becoming a gravity maker, but the simplest way, remember the cavity effect of Grebennikov is essentially a super dielectric in the presence of the hummer of the low frequency sound of that insect, actually. Now, the simplest way to think about that is to understand the physics of how the pyramids are a global wireless power grid, and were very functional in that regard. And they were called the Hummer, originally by the Arcturians. And the reason is because the piezo pyramid, also some super dielectric, like Grebennikov's insect skeleton, super dielectric. And so you take this dielectric, which is very piezo, and the low frequency infrasound, the same exact phase conjugate pump wave, that's the Schumann cascade, is the exact brainwave signature I just showed you making bliss, the same exact frequencies. You take those low frequencies, causing the pyramids to be called the Hummer, and the compression effect, because the angle ratio is golden for height to base, means there is an implosion converting the transverse to the longitudinal out the base. Sometimes it was amplified by Mercury. But the point was that then pump that into the longitudinal array, and every single pyramid is on the longitudinal array of the Earth grid. And Tesla didn't get that right and didn't get the frequencies right. So obviously he never got global wireless power going, because he didn't actually understand the fractality tuned to Planck required for global wireless power, the longitudinal array. But once you understand that, you can understand how your human bliss responding to your brainwave signatures, pumping your DNA helix and spitting out that longitudinal. It's essentially enabled implosion in every case. The physics of bliss, physics of pyramids, physics of gravity making, physics of life force. It's all about enabled implosion in living plasma, and no machine is ever going to do it.
If I may add very quickly to what Dan is saying there, and then forgive me, human vibrations, if you want to jump in after myself. In addition, or to add to what Dan is saying, not in replacement to, but to add, one can make a strong argument that everything Dan just described there is also how a child is birthed. or how when two humans come together, there's the birthing of a child. And it's interesting because it speaks to me, and I'm sure to many others here, of the concept of topology, for example. And topology would speak to enabling a higher dimension, if we will, and that quote unquote higher dimension would only be possible via what's called the z-axis, or the longitudinal array. And what's interesting is that it's when we think of, for example, electric permittivity in physics of the ether or the vacuum as the divine masculine, and we think of magnetic permeability as the divine feminine. It's interesting that when in a nuts and bolts regard, when those vectors are theoretically summed to zero, there is then that implosion, and it gives this idea, or it gives notion to this idea or credence that gravity may be the birth child of electricity and magnetism coming together in a particular condition. So, and it's interesting.
You could make that very specific when you plot the point of max pressure in the birth canal, right, and the breath. Its golden ratio into the duration of the compression wave. Literally, the physics of why birth is blissful, that implosion, and the physics of that bliss is the physics of all ensoulment.
And if I may say, to add to both the work of Elizabeth and Dan, if anyone would even be interested in looking, for those more interested in the physics side, with regards to, I believe they were Russians, Landau and Lifshitz, in the 1970s and 80s, where they talked about gravity being a second order effect of electromagnetism, then it would certainly substantiate everything that Elizabeth and Dan are saying here in this regard.
Implosion of charge.
Right.
Crow?
I'm trying to keep up here. I'm finding a lot of it very, very interesting. I kind of tuned in when he started talking about the non-destructive collapse and about implosions. And so from my point of view, where we're being sold right now that we're in the age of information, I actually feel like we're in the age of deception. And I was going to ask Dan, is part of that deception, from your point of view, if you consider the things that have been foisted on us that they refuse to walk away from, while they're starting to now, like say the internal combustion engine, those explosions seem to be against the kind of natural processes that you're talking about. You're talking about a non-destructive collapse. You're talking about torus fields. You're talking about implosions. And here we go out to our car. It starts exploding and corruption spews from the tailpipe instantly. And so why,
beautiful point.
You could ask, why the hell haven't we gone to these more universally acceptable natural systems? Is this part of our world of deception, forcing explosions on us?
Well, and until we have access to bliss inside, we don't know how to steer it outside either.
Right.
So
good point.
Right. Great point.
Yeah.
in other words, we can't steer gravity waves. They needed teenagers who were lucid dreamers to steer the timeshare at Montauk because the Dracos didn't have a soul.
I wanted off point a minute, but I'm in Rhode Island, and I lived near the Newport Tower, and I noticed that you referenced it.
Exactly.
What's your view on the Newport Tower?
Well, that John Dee designed it to demonstrate the pinhole camera physics. Actually, he was using the scintillation point, which is the turning inside out point of optical conjugation, literally to make telephone calls to spirit entities, angels, and ancestors, the same way the Olmec did, because that compression point where the longitudinal array is touched, that's the physics of all ancestral communication. So the same kids who started seeing without their eyes, they actually were developing clairvoyance. Suddenly they were seeing their ancestors, and the parents freaked.
If I can give you a visual example, Crow, if you look, for example, at either what's called the Aronoff-Bohm effect, or just the visual symbol of the quantum dot, or if you look at, for example, even
quantum dot, yes.
Right, as I interpret it, the Eye of Ra or Horus, if you look at it from above, it speaks to that center point that is being imploded, but non-destructively. And so
scintillation communication.
There we go.
Vesica Pisces.
And what I find very interesting, if I may just throw in very quickly, is that I've actually come across some books when I've been along my travels, where there have been certain books that I've read from, say, the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there were rooms that were arranged in a particular way to induce what they called a seance experiment, or they called it a seance room. I then took that page and put it side by side with some of the modern pictures of what quantum physics laboratories are arranging today. It's identical in its arrangement, with mirrors, with lasers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting just to see, to Crow, to your question about the potential, deception and relabeling of things. What was called seance rooms pre-World War I is now called quantum laboratories.
Entanglement,
right?
Literally.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
and they even measured telepathy was only possible where the magnetic lines crossed. Hint: compression, the longitudinal array. It's physics.
Right.
And you spoke of bliss and this amplification of bliss that the pyramids provided. Perhaps it's one artifact, perhaps, but we talk about this also with these ancient churches that are stuck on these ley lines that were come in, taken over, and they only rebuild. Baalbek is a wonderful example of these. They just took the foundation that was there and built on top.
So they always keep the foundation there, but they always change the appearance every X amount of 100 years.
Yeah, the Vatican's, everything's on an ancient something or another. And the point of it really is energetics, right? Now, with this also, you have the churches that are built on top of this that have now even been destroyed. We have the whole Tatarian idea that comes in with this, but they've been the machines, let's say, that they are, these mechanisms of operation for these amplifications of energies, they've been disabled or dismantled in a way, just like the pyramids missing the capstone, so they're broken. It's like they took the batteries out, Right. But the windows on them as well sort of have a reflection pattern of the cymatic frequencies that are emanated with these organs and with these bells, and these bells are a whole nother thing. So sound plays a massive component in this.
Yeah. Infrasound implosion.
What's the infrasound implosion? So what's the significance between the structures, the structure of the building itself, where it sits energetically, and then sound component of these things as well?
Well, remember that the physics was, as Kathy proved, the nuclear critical mass is reduced at those longitudinal node cross points, and telepathy, military quality telepathy, is only possible at those nodal cross points as well. And the measured nanoteslas of the magnetic line cross points was how they set up the cozy web mirrors for that reason. So everything which contributes and is in phase to implosion at the nodes enables that coupling, which is, we could say, impedance matching to the longitudinal array, which is DNA radio, literally, and access to even when the advanced cultures, the Andromedas, when they set up a Stargate, they start with a natural magnetic cross point. And access to that nodal array is the beginning of all lucid dreaming and everything that is going to survive death.
Nature's already given us the model. We just have to build on it.
Yeah,
not force or go against it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And live in harmony with the loved one, not
Right.
against it in these rigid cross-section structures and this unorganic way of this non-phi ratio.
You find, and if I may say, if I may give a quick example as it comes to my mind of what Dan was saying with respects to when a self-implosion non-destructively does not occur, not just in a nuts and bolts sense, but even, for example, in an individual in general. If someone is starting to get, for example, very angry about something that bothers them in general, what I find very interesting about that is when it tends to be something within them, not externally.
Well,
so in other words, they're not able to self-implode non-destructively.
They explode on those around them.
Exactly.
They say, oh, exploded all over that guy. It's in the vernacular.
Right.
It's trained in the programming.
Yeah.
So to die well, you need to compress well, actually implode, and bliss is required. It's interesting that today is Ascension Day, and I think Ascension should be canceled for the Pope until they learn the electrical engineering. And actually, the electrical engineering is quite simple. When you sit still in the node of that array and your aura gets bigger and bigger, and eventually, not only do you realize you can see down the nodes of that array like it's a wormhole, but then you begin to realize you can move things at a distance in that array, like aboriginals and songlines. That's called inhabiting the array. And that is the only definition of ascension in honor of today's Ascension holiday.
And inhabiting the array would just basically be to see it as what it is and to be able to see your role in it.
And to feel it. What you're feeling is,
right.
As you inhabit the center of that implosion, you get leverage on that array and you can steer a bigger and bigger tornado. And that's called growing up.
And anybody ever, I couldn't agree more. And anybody ever notice, for example, and then I would love to pass it off to Human Vibrations. If would love to get your take on any or all of this. I on a more nuts and bolts sense, just to make that transition and translation there, I find it very incredible and peculiar. Of course, Dan being the one here with us as well, that if you look, for example, anywhere in the world, any government or any military, any even private company that is even rumored to be working on, UAP, UFOs, or anything like this, free energy, all of it, it's not so much physicists that are involved. It's more so electrical engineers. So I find it very interesting. If you look, for example, let's face it, Salvatore Cesar Paez, the UFOs, the Navy's guy, they say, electrical engineer by trade. Right now, that is not to say that there's any, that physicists are not needed, but it's interesting to see that there may be something that is missing from an electrical standpoint that physicists, or most of them, are not picking up on. Now, I would say that doesn't really necessarily apply to the individuals in this call. I'm speaking more so externally, but yeah, I find that just to, try and drop a breadcrumb there. So,
human vibration. How are we doing?
I've got so many notes. My mind is expanding. My reality is expanding. This has been so wonderful. Dr. Dan, I loved your presentation, and I loved how you brought it all back to bliss point, to the concept of bliss. This was something that in 2020 was kind of my awakening process, early 2020, January. And, something just kept, it all came around, like the idea of our energy is the most potent and precious resource on the planet, and everything here is trying to extract and eradicate extract our energies and eradicate our ability to be neutral in energy. And kind of like I think of bliss, I'm not sure if this is, the proper, way to view it from the physics standpoint, but I see bliss as like a neutral, as a net neutral energetically. Bliss is not joy. It's not.
You're saying it just is.
It's kind of energetically neutral, and I think we're kind of born in with a bliss state as our like standard OS, our standard operating emotion. Is bliss? Just think about the baby in utero. Just think of that floating.
It would certainly substantiate why children are able to see spirits and all of that much more so than adults.
Yeah, they're connected. They're deeply, deeply connected. I also, so I have so many, the idea that we talked at the you mentioned how, we're kind of, our DNA is set up to be radio receivers, this intense telepathy. I do believe that all this advanced technology, advanced quote unquote, cellular devices where we can connect to anybody, anywhere. I think that is just kind of a mockery and a mimicry of what we have inborn of processes that, again, it's like an eradication of our natural ability, our natural state. I think we're born kind of with three things. We've got an existence. We've got our physical body. We've got that. We've got an awareness, which is our conscious mind. And then we've got bliss, which is our natural state. But all three of those things are our body and our mind and our bliss. Modern life just mows over all of those. And we are living a life completely out of alignment with our true state. And I love that that's what you guys do. Brandon, I know that so many of you, everybody here, all of your efforts are getting us back to thinking and doing and feeling and believing and knowing.
HV, can I just say very quickly, can I just add to what you're saying there? Basically, this is my interpretation, just to be clear, but when people use, say, for example, the term love and light, and they say, for example, well, they don't necessarily agree with that. Well, I very kindly disagree with that perspective. And the reason is because, in my opinion, love can at the core of it, at the ground state of it, we can equivalate love to gravity and light to photons. So, right. I mean, it's interesting that on internal, for example, documents that have been leaked over the years and all of that, it's been a lot of certain terms have been used, for example, like gravidophotons or graviphotons or things like this. So I find it, let me just say, HV, that I fundamentally and absolutely agree with what you're saying. There's a direct correlation that merges the physical with the non-physical, the world of the very small with the very large. I think that in my opinion, you're right on the money. So.
And our very word love, long wave phi ratio, or perfect embedding, that implosion, and that compression success is the preceding element that enables the charge radiance named bliss. A very practical example, when we use the word politic, actually the original origin word is body polis. Now, a beehive cannot swarm without royal blood present, because there's nothing to navigate. And the royal blood is actually literally the bliss component, because when you have bliss, you have literally the body of plasma coherence, the Ba from the Ka, called body polis, which is the only element that enables collective navigation. In other words, without bliss, there is no politics, literally. In other words, the function of government is to enable humans to implode enough to have the bliss that makes their aura cocoon collectively navigable, the only definition of politics. Therefore, the function of politics is to teach humans the physics of how to have bliss process. Otherwise, there is no immune health, and there functionally is no soul, and there's nothing that gets immortal. In other words, if you can't teach your child how to have a bliss process, you do not only do you not have culture, you have no way to teach the origin of immune health and anything to get through death.
Bliss process is being knocked off of equilibrium to some anything, and then being able to right yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, and come back to center. That's a bliss process. Is that a really reductive
way? The fusion of charge at center will be self-sorting. All, for, 6 months after my Kundalini, I did nothing but cry. I was sorting. Right. Every emotion that you ever had that was not shareable. Great way to get ready to die, for example.
God, I think that happened when my dog, man, I think we share this. Actually, you may have just answered a huge thing for me, and thank you.
Could you do me a favor? Could you pin just our screen for a moment? I'd like to show something on the paper here for everybody.
Sure.
So, and this is completely substantiating what the Crow, what HV, what Dan is saying, what Elizabeth is saying, all of it. So if we look, for example, we're taught in science or in physics or you name it, that there's only the X and Y, we could say vectors or coordinates on a Cartesian plane or axes, if you will. What Dan is speaking to, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, is at center point, there's this implosion that occurs, and we can call this, for the sake of just labeling the z-axis. Now, what's interesting is that this opens up literally the manipulation of gravity, of different dimensions, of all of it. But here's one thing in a visual regard. If we were to draw the same thing on the opposing side here, in that exact same regard, what we have is not only the concept of the pine cones kissing, we have the tuning forks, we have the Eye of Ra and Horus, we have the same shape that Ed Lascallon had made at his Coral Castle with his wood. So we see over and over this. And also, by the way, this enables what would be called phase conjugation or phase locking. You are taking the different phases, and then at center point, there's that mixture of implosion.
Yes, and literally the presence then of longitudinal coherence, which is the only presence of soul. So when they live, when the dark glasses revealed, oh, they don't have a soul, what they're referring to with the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan body, the rainbow light body, is literally the longitudinal coherence. So hint, if your kids are not learning to lucid dream, they're not going to take anything through death. Sorry. And we know the exact electrical field that helps trigger lucid dreaming, Therify.net. We know the brainwave signature that triggers lucid dreaming, flameinmind.com. It's all about that implosion that enables that coherent longitudinal radiance. And that's the key to all bliss process.
And if I may just add one more thing, if we were to just quickly draw out more of that, what you would have here would be basically the human DNA strand as well.
Yeah, imploding. The double helix tuned to the phase conjugate pump wave. The phase conjugate pump wave of human bliss, which is the brainwave signature, is literally exactly the Schumann harmonics. So if you can get exposed to the Schumann harmonics, oh dear, they don't seem to be getting into your city. Oops.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we walk barefoot everywhere out here, dude. We consider ourselves just water carriers that are grounding to the earth
there
electrically.
There are physicists that have said in the past that some that have had involvement with gravity before they kind of disappeared from the public eyes, that they had talked about there's a direct correlation with the Schumann resonance or the Earth's heartbeat. And the reason that it's not
golden ratio times Planck is the Schumann frequencies and the brainwave frequentions.
Right.
It's all about that implosion.
Maybe they disappeared because they turned off gravity and yeeted out.
Well, yeah.
So then the question is, and I will pose this as just a, let's go speculate wildly. And actually I'm going to throw this one to Crow. If then now knowing what we know about the Schumann resonance and this planet and this place or our importance on this area, what is with the narrative to get us off planet and this idea that we can go somewhere else and this stirring us all up to get excited about it? Because now what we're hearing is that perhaps we need contact with Gaia just to exist and for reality to be a thing. It sounds like any time off of Gaia would then degrade our reality.
May add to that very quickly, it's been known that astronauts, when they go up into space or whatever, it's a different debate, if you will, but they bring with them a little box. where it is emitting the Schumann resonance, because clearly there's some type of resonant phase locking, as we've been discussing, that needs to be at least somewhat within proximity of them if they're not close to the heart of Mother Earth, if we would like to call it that.
Do you think this is what the little bags that the Sumerians were carrying perhaps was? A frequency generator from their home planet, maybe?
Anything history, I don't speculate, because the possibilities...
Sitchin said that was the ME stone, the May stone of the Sumerian, from which we get the word measurement, Mayasa Uru. Actually, that was a Sumerian computer disk. But as a crystal, it's related to what's called the toy stone or fire crystal, which is as close as it comes to Elizabeth Donovan's Koski Frost crystal.
This is why I don't speculate on history, because there's others that know far better than me. I just focus on the physics. So
I like speculating wildly. I don't care. Crow, what are your thoughts on this off-planet narrative?
I'm not buying. Everything that I've done in my personal experience and my half a decade behind a telescope, we're tuned here. And I currently accept that it's not possible to take physical things like lucid dreaming, a meditator. Maybe those people are leaving this space, but I don't think you take your tennis shoes with you.
Right.
That's where I'm at.
Right.
And so when we begin to see, part of it is being able, you get to a point where you can see through the narratives that we're being given. Like, I mean, we've got a rover on Mars, right? The Chinese just landed on the moon. Well, no, they didn't. And when you look at what's true about the things we've been told, what's true is none of it's true. And when you begin to see that, you begin to see why. At this point, I accept that the sun is a lens. And I suspect, and I am less certain, actually, certain is probably the wrong word. It is definitely the wrong word. I am less accepting of my perception that the moon may well be better described as a reflection. But I am as confident as I can be that describing the sun as a lens is at least on the right path. And interestingly enough, some of the people that I have met just by dint of doing what I do, people who I would have never met in my regular life away from what I do, are in positions in high places, and they actually tell one another that the sun is a lens. I was recently informed. And
It is well known among shaman that the heart of the sun is experienced as an eyeball and an organ of perception, literally Anu, and how Osiris inhabited. The heart of the sun is, in fact, not hot. And the reason it's an eyeball is because it's the most implosive and conjugate plasma in the solar system. So every advanced shaman knows that only inhabiting the heart of the sun is the way in or out of here. That's absolutely true. And it is an eyeball. And every ancient religion is a sun god religion for that reason. And the Anu, which is the geometry of how clairvoyants saw the heart of the sun, 7 spins, 5 spins, is actually literally this structure and the exact symmetry of the human heart and the heart of hydrogen. For that reason, it is pure implosive charge collapse and therefore an eyeball. Very true. So, it's true. You haven't grown up until you've inhabited the eye of the sun. It's absolutely literally the truth.
So there's another thing I would point out, which is the flaw of our times, that the era of deception, and Dan just hit on it. The sun is not hot. And while all of our science convinces us, boy, if you get close to that sun, you're just going to burn up. Well, there are plenty of writings from, I don't know whether you want to call them alchemists or other things, that were saying this very thing. And then why are the mountaintops covered with snow? Well, science has an answer for that. Why does it get colder the higher up you go? Well, science has an answer for that. And it's part of this grand deception. But here's a question. We just did an episode on generations. Why would anyone over 100 years ago have spent so much resources and time to be working towards the world takeover that we see, that they think is coming to fruition now, when they're not going to be alive to see it?
Well, I have partnered with Elena Danan in her book, The Cedars, for example, and we believe very, very strongly that she's right, that the Federation has ejected the Nebu, the Greys, and the Dracos, largely from the solar system, and their minions are collapsing now, which is relatively good news, and that, in fact, what we call the Anunnaki, and Lil was one of them, actually, Yahweh, and was basically a pretty big parasite, and called themselves the chosen race for not good reasons. It was literally a genetic engineering agenda. But the bigger picture is that Enki, Ea, for whom Earth was named, has returned. He's outside of Ganymede and has a very specific agenda called Adam Kadmon, which is the restoration, you could say, the genetic recipe for the possibility of bliss. The reason that Lucifer and Moses had horns was that Kundalini enabled the plasma projection of the ventricle liquids, the physics of Kundalini, the charged radiance, which is ensouling, and the possibility for the human collective to teach their kids how to have a soul, and the genetic possibility for that is a bigger agenda than the parasites who set up most of the earth religions, and they were parasites. The Roman takeover of Christianity, and little Yahweh, the parasitic half reptilian Draco Anunnaki, who was the origin of the Jewish religion. I mean, this is not good news. There was a genetic agenda and extremely parasitic behind earth religion. So that's bad news. The good news is, once the physics of bliss is teachable as pure science, the absolute self-empowering of that transcends all ideas about, am I obeying God? That's pure crap. No, the possibility of becoming centripetal enough to become a sun god yourself, that is the self-empowering outcome of the big picture. And yes, there's lots of ETs here and involved, and all of them are involved in keeping us free enough from those parasites long enough to learn that simple lesson.
And yet the ejections keep coming.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I mean, if you look around, the Earth seems like all bad news, but our ET friends are saying, actually, they did. They ejected the Greys and the Dracos out of Mars and the Moon and Ceres. Tony, I don't know Tony Rodriguez. I know him very well. So, and a lot of the bad guys actually have been ejected, but we humans have to deal with the human remnant of that karma. And the moment we are self-empowered enough to realize that actually, if you can teach your kids how to have bliss process, the origins of all possibility of ensoulment, not only is that the only definition of culture, it's the only definition of immune health and immortality. At that point, all religions are it's a nightmare that you can wake up from.
That's the thing. You have separation from this in your reality right now, and that's what's real for you. Do you feel that way? That you, as an example here, I turned off the news, and therefore I'm not affected by what the news says I should be affected by. It's not in my reality anymore. I created that. So is this something that you're feeling is more of a consensus reality thing that we're all sort of subject to, whether we're under a delusion that it's not existent or not?
I find turning off the news to be not appropriate. I find looking for the clues in the news that show that ensoulment is starting. I find that, like recent publications that publish the physics of the measured frequencies that trigger lucid dreaming, hint ensoulment, which, by the way, happen to fit my equation, golden ratio. So suddenly there's many areas of hope where humans are recognizing there are certain aspects of ensoulment that will immortalize them, and that will allow us to transcend our parasites. So yes, we need to wake up from the nightmare of history, because it was just a nightmare once we recognize the reality, but that doesn't mean ignoring it.
Yeah, and not ignoring it in a way, alchemizing it is the way I'd prefer to.
Yes,
totally.
So, alchemizing is literally the physics of imploding it, turning it all into literally bliss process. Absolutely.
And when to this, and it's easy to get caught up in it because I dance, we dance within this stuff with the information, and it's heavy, and you feel your responsibility, or I've felt a former responsibility to facilitate other people's karma and wake them up, which I don't anymore. But what I mean to say is that with this, I found new clarity in the understanding of alchemy, that it's all just options of experience. And whenever they went on the news, and that I pointed this out, I say the lizard turds, first of all, I'm not a fan of the bad guy idea. I look at it as a motivating inspirer for us to really get our shit together and to come forward for a singularity. And it speaks to everyone in the language in which they need to receive it to be at their highest and greatest and show up to be the greatest and grandest that they can. And that's why there's a myriad in my mind of options of experience here that facilitate this. Now, whenever the governors came out, and there's a beautiful collaboration that's been put together, a compilation that's been put together of this and said, okay, well, we have 33 cases. We have 33 cases. We have 33 cases. When talking about the corona, at first, of course, we're all Freemasonic. Oh no, it's happening and all of this. The way that I looked at it after some reflection, not initially, is that 33 is the power, the number of ascension. It's a very powerful, spiritual, significant number. And so whenever it's being rolled out, it's not being apprehended in my mind. It's a signal that yes, it's going off, but I alchemize it in a way to where it was useful for me, to where I didn't sit in fear with it. I'm like, okay, good, it's going off. So my job now is to be basically a trip sitter for a bunch of people that are going to be bringing a bunch of things to the surface. They have no idea what's going on, and we're all walking each other home at this point, and it's kicking off. But in a positive way is how I perceived it. But I'm a boundless optimist. I mean, that's just how I see it.
Well, in a practical biological level, if we had the first clue of what a soul is, and it's measurable in the coherence of the aura, not to mention the longitudinal coherence, so you can measure when the aura becomes detached, literally dissociated from the center of the body after vaccination, for example. So once you know what ensoulment is and can teach your kids that, then you will be able to make biological decisions intelligently. Until then, there's no possibility of medical intelligence because they don't know what a soul is. Even in terms of genetic engineering, it doesn't mean that genetic engineering is evil. No, it means that if you don't know what the hell a soul is, keep your hands off the DNA braid.
I would tend to agree. Absolutely.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. So I am curious about if, we had spoken about AI earlier. Do y'all think that AI is perhaps revealing the reality of reality, what's really real here in the best way it can, in a subjective manner, in which then we can say, actually, no, that's not reality. And it's presenting us the opposite of what's actually true. But it's a version of it for us to then alchemize and use as a springboard. An example would be like this ChatGPT. Apparently, it can give you business strategies that would take you 7 years of business school in minutes to be able to do. Now, with this as well, again, as we alchemize, is there AI components or a version of AI that is alchemizable to be a
Are you
tool for
speaking
us
to
here?
a more organic sense of nature? Sort of, people could argue Mother Nature is a form. I see this carefully, of AI trying to tell us things.
Yes. So basically, tapping into the AI or the natural algorithms that's here to kind of get a bigger glimpse at the picture of what artificial AI is trying to provide for us.
Well, first of all, there is nothing evil about artificial intelligence. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it's useful, and should be used. The evil is not to understand the difference between artificial intelligence and a soul. Let me give the example. When Swaru basically died, the Palladian and Tegan, and they tried to resynthesize from her shipboard computer and thought that personality they resynthesized from the computer had a soul. It did not. And that kind of AI has become the scourge of the galaxy, only up until the point at which we understand exactly what is the ensouling component of human existence. Once we understand that crystal clear and we can put the artificial intelligence at the service of ensoulment, then it's all beautiful. But as long as our teenagers think they're going to stick their memories inside a computer to get immortal, that is evil.
Yeah.
That's been like what they say in Westworld, where that proposal of attempting to bootstrap consciousness, which I fundamentally disagree with, but the idea of trying to just take memories, a base
the mental
memory,
machine is the opposite of consciousness by definition.
Right. Taking a memory, and this, again, don't agree with this at all, and just constantly stacking memories, and based on those, it can then use those as references neurologically, and then there's an argument that has been made, which is the whole, well, they're conscious. Well, I would personally very strongly disagree. Sentient, maybe, but conscious, I would say far from.
It's bullshit. Until our teenagers know what soul is, they're going to be confused.
They are. Now, I'm just curious because I've heard this argument brought up that the components that we would utilize to build a machine are all from Gaia. They're from here, essentially. So they're technically organic in a way. They're from this place and therefore carry the Schumann resonance. Is there anything to this? I'm just asking.
The very word machination, the CH is from the Hebrew chem, alchem, the origin of the term alchemy, which means access to a black hole. Well, guess what? You cannot access a black hole in a metal machine because the dielectric is wrong. Hello. It ain't never going to have a soul in that damn machine. Mm-hmm. So as long as we make the soul in living plasma and use our machines to help us, it's fine. But if we don't know what a soul is, our kids are going to get lost real quick.
If I may ask very quickly, and I would just love to integrate a question that one of my members had for you, Dan, which is, this one is from Kat, but speaking since we're on the subject, Kat would like to know what unique role cranial sacred fluid plays, if you could speak on its nature and function.
Oh, it's beautiful. So the low frequencies of the spine liquid pump, called the tidals, it's a profound, beautiful infrasound cascade tuned to the heart rate variability, HRV, and the breath. All of that physics is at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. And you can see the low frequencies of the spine liquid pump precisely in phase with the breath and pumping up to the Schumann cascade as it drives the brain, the physics of Kundalini. And by the way, if your spine liquid is pumping, requiring that cascade, it is clinically then impossible to be depressed. So spine liquid pump physics is everything, because it is the platform upon which bliss is based and which Kundalini is based. That's why Moses had horns.
And this is how consciousness can get consolidated, so it can then be passed into a crystal or other medium using breath and compression.
It's the only way bliss can become bodily. Otherwise, it's stuck in the head. So you're going to have to, which is why you start with the Schumann, the Mayer wave 10-second breath, and the low frequency cascade HRV component, LF, pumps the spine liquid cascade, which is the tidal frequencies. And that's all the yoga of the origin of Kundalini and the spine liquid pump. And it's a beautiful physics of introduction to the physics of bliss. It's perfect.
Is that tidal, like tidal wave, the same, so tight. Like
the term tidal is used in the sacrocranial literature up Ledger in Florida, who proved that it was clinically impossible to be depressed if your spine liquid is pumping. And the only way that spine liquid pump is if it's in phase with the Schumann cascade. You know, when one person touches the fascia and they insert their attention into the child's body, and their spine liquid pump then comes into phase, and they're then healed because someone touched them and inserted centripetal force. That's example of the onset of phase coherence in spine liquid pump.
HV, this is also why a lot of people have argued that our bodies are natural particle accelerators, because when you think of Kundalini, you're building up the resonance right up until the very
imploding,
and you're imploding. Yes, exactly. So
it feels like a lightning bolt went up your tailbone and came out the crown of your head. And if you survived,
yes, coming from Mother Earth, because from your grounding state, the particles are then, regardless of what the particles are comprised of, are then, because your body is dielectric, are then going up the body, from the ground up the body, and the resonance continues to build as it goes up to that implosive point.
And it feels like you're inhabiting a lightning bolt, literally.
Dude, I've heard horror stories. I mean, horror stories like you. They're much like yours.
It can kill you, or
I heard people die.
Both. But if you remain centered and grounded enough, the acceleration of mentation rate is why I can talk fast. 30 years of intense Kundalini, and we have the most advanced courses on the biophysics of Kundalini on the planet. But just like in the movie Powder, if you can inhabit that lightning bolt like Daniel Brinkley did, everyone he touched, he had a flash of every intense emotion of their life, because his DNA became a superconductor. Because when you zap it with low amperage lightning at the moment of crystallization, just like a gold monofilament. So it's a beautiful introduction to bliss physics.
Where do you stand on the human as a robot? I think we have a language issue. We see robots as hunks of metal with wires all through them. But if you compare, we're skinned just like a computer casing is skinned. We have internal wiring.
Well, some have said organic containers. Some have
like a bioorganic robotics.
But when the feedback loop becomes recursive, like, in the Princeton Noosphere experiment, they measured when 3,000 people died on 9/11. That longitudinal propagation, they don't understand that was a longitudinal array. But by the way, no mechanical robot felt that. No.
Right.
What's with the random number generators that detected that?
Because it's a Josephson junction, and they don't realize it's capacitive coupling to the longitudinal array. They're idiots.
So there's a gradience in basically magnetic induction that pairs.
Well, it's a Josephson junction which couples by capacitive coupling to the longitudinal array.
So what happened on 9/11? What happened?
The Princeton Noosphere experiment famously measured the random number generators had a huge glitch on 9/11. Well, in fact, that was a longitudinal propagation because souls died. And the ability to pick that up generally doesn't happen in a machine. No, it happens in a living.
Would a mass energetic event, whether or not souls died, but regardless of the souls that died, the response globally is a lot more than 3,000 people. So let's say a global billion response. Is that what is shifting, making a shift? Is that what is influencing more so than the 3,000 souls? So regardless of the 3,000 souls,
they shifted before the
connection
event
to the array, so that those who had the ability to feel the force be with you, and no metal machine is going to feel the force be with you. Luke Skywalker knew that. He was right. He had to go to nature to get that.
So
That's the raising the dead.
Right. So you'd have to basically, what would be happening as well would be a temporal anomaly as well with the number generators, because you'd be tapping that z-axis.
Of course, there's a temporal, which is
you can build a machine without metal, you know.
Well, no, but the issue is the recursion that enables that connection to that presence. There are lots of beautifully advanced intelligences that don't look human. That ain't the issue.
And many humans are recursive. Many humans live a completely recursive life with
many humans
on loops and loops and loops.
But many humans, most humans probably are not in touch with their soul, actually.
So are they robots?
Well, they're in danger of becoming robots, yes. And a good clue is those who can lucid dream, those almost for sure are developing connection to soul.
Shit, what? I don't dream at all. Like, I've talked about this, and if I do, I don't really remember them. So what's up with that, Dr. Dan? Am I a robot? Am I an NPC?
Well, in other words, if you gave yourself time and space, the exercises for lucid dreaming, there are frequencies, infrasound for lucid dreaming, and there is plasma for lucid dreaming. It's a well-known physics. In fact, the frequencies for teaching lucid dreaming, the lucid dreaming site at therify.net, our plasma tech in 25 countries has a lucid dreaming site there because we trigger lucid dreaming regularly. All it means is that your aura has begun to spit out longitudinal EMF coherently, and that you're beginning to inhabit the array. And that is critical for ensoulment. It's absolutely true. So connection, it's probably the only real indicator you have if you're going to take memory at death.
Shit. That also explains why gravity is a second order derivative from electromagnetism, because what you're doing is
I thought
it's second order in the sense that the electromagnetism is the charge.
Right.
The charge acceleration is a second order effect, and that's named gravity.
And that's why basically you'd have a sort of a locking in and a phase locking, because by definition you
in the vortex.
And that's also what a Josephson junction would be as well, as Dan had mentioned earlier.
It's a capacitive coupler.
Exactly.
The capacitive node can couple with a longitudinal component if there's coherence massively.
Okay, but I'm gonna have a tough time giving up the fact that when I feel like I go to sleep, I'm a super awesome space ninja on the other side, and I wipe my memory every time I wake up, so I don't remember.
Well, I recommend studying lucid dreaming literature, and the physics is very instructive. The first time he went and the lucid dreaming, he could see his lover and not smell her. But the second time, what was the difference in that coherence you took with you into the array?
If I may also ask as well, since we're on this topic, this is a question from Kevin for Dan. What product did Dr. Dan Winter have Jean-Charles Moyen use to test his brainwave activity, and where can we get it? Can this be used for training one's energy and biofeedback?
flameinmind.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
And all this stuff's going to be linked down below. All these things, guys. Crow,
it's a brainwave spectrum analyzer, and when you go golden ratio, that implosion is present, and it's a physics of bliss, and it's literally a flame in the mind.
Quick question. Sorry, yeah.
Crow, do you lucid dream?
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes, I have.
What are your thoughts on that process? Was it something you engaged in, or like surprised you, if you don't mind me asking?
It happened before I ever had an idea of working towards things or meditating or any of these things that became important to me later in life. As a matter of fact, I didn't really comprehend until later when I look back. But there are places.
You had some indigenous blood?
I am adopted, and I am told that I am half German and half Greek, if that's what you're referring
generally,
to.
if ancestors walk the same magnetic line for thousands of years, the DNA is more phase coherent, called soul, and you get more leverage on the array.
I've heard this about how you can use an astronomical chart or something, your human design or something, to tell where you're supposed to live.
Well, if it's fractal, it'd be scalable. So you can.
Well, it's called abraxas. The term is abraxas point, which is why Aboriginals do not leave their place of birth.
That's right.
Because the title deed to the land over which they have control of the dreaming is actually how they steer the storms.
Yeah, and the Hopi did this as well. They felt that life continued because of the dances that they did and the sights that they did.
That z-axis, then, for example, in this reality, say just one of these diamonds would be the reality in which they were born in, and they would want that to be the case because although it cannot be experienced or observed, there's that longitudinal axis that is always present.
The longitudinal array is the dreaming track, is the song line.
Yeah, that's the third strand of DNA.
When Auntie Lorraine died, the storm went thousands of miles because that magnetic line was the family pet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's literally, notice how it comes back to the same principles. Whether you crunch the numbers, whether you explore it spiritually, it comes back to the same concepts always. There's no other way around it.
It's a magnetic blood.
Right. And that's your z-axis, which people have proposed the third strand of DNA is actually dielectric, comprised of copper.
It's the implosive component.
Right. In which is very nano. It cannot be seen by the human eye, but it can be seen with quantum detectors.
Well, actually, when the kids go into bliss, then they can see their ancestors.
They can see.
Yeah, I've seen these kids wearing these masks and like stacking blocks and picking cards.
Exactly. And the same kids suddenly are talking to their ancestors and the parents freak. It's wonderful. Longitudinal physics is clairvoyance.
Now, is this an environmental thing or an us thing ability to comprehend this? And then like the children are just coming through more aware of these things, or is this something environmental that's caused the change, or both?
Well, kids who have access to nature have an advantage here, but the old trick was actually to go into the measurable EEG bliss state that enables kids to see with other eyes. The trick was imagine yourself in beautiful nature and your body flips a switch and gets fractal and implodes.
Damn, that's why, man, we're out here in the country. And so we're grounding, constantly walking barefoot all over the place, just enjoying the fact that butterflies exist. And we feel wonderful. Like maybe this is like the bliss process.
Well, right on.
Y'all are all welcome to come out here, by the way. You could come spend some time out
I'm
here.
taking you up on that soon. Yeah, I gotta come see that labyrinth you were talking about.
Dude,
Dave, you had more questions, so should we let's
if that's okay, if I just throw in a couple more. This is from a good friend of mine and member, Brian. Let's see here. What would seem to be the best way to amplify the seemingly small output of a Casimir device? Perhaps some type of Hertzian increase in the spectrum, or
the Casimir effect is a very low power effect. Although if the two surfaces that are almost touching are very large, that very low power could become usable.
Right.
Now the way we couple low power, like the way we couple brainwaves, and then the way we measure whether a tree is getting the Schumann harmonics, which predicts which tree is going to live or die. We use capacitive coupling, basically.
Right. And sorry, one last one. Might one view this superposition of 3D space, 3D time, and 3D gravity at the point of Planck fire during the brief Planck time interval to be, in fact, maybe the Big Bang, which starts with a kiss?
The Big Bang is only a name for the propagation of Planck. So the fact that Planck has propagated is the only evidence. And there's no evidence for a Big Bang. There's only evidence for Planck. And Planck was necessary because gravity waves are not shareable otherwise. So the only charge distribution that enabled gravity was the fact that Planck is the same for 1,000,000 light years in all direction. So the Big Bang is crap and dark matter is crap, but Planck is real. Actually. And what we're calling ascension is the name for the fact when additional axes of charge spin symmetry are superposed, which shows up in the power spectrum, which is the only definition of going to the next dimension, as in human bliss.
How does Planck relate to Planck, the smallest unit of measurement?
If I could, sure, to give a visual example, HV, it is of my interpretation, thanks to Dan and Elizabeth and others, that basically, well, mainly Dan and Elizabeth, that helped me formulate this, that if we think of, for example, this pad right over here of paper, say anything and everything above here is considered physical and everything below here is non-physical. So this would be Planck by definition. So this would be the threshold or border, if you will, that merges the physical with the non-physical. So
propagation into the longitudinal, it happens at Planck's threshold specifically. It is the unit of both length and time into which every wave physics has ever measured divides evenly. It is the musical key signal.
Eyeball? Like, is the point where light meets our eye, is that a Planck?
Well, actually, the scintillation point where the phase conjugate optics implodes and converges, that is Planck. And that is where DNA radio starts and where ancestor communication is enabled. Planck is the ultimate DNA radio. Absolutely.
I'm not saying this is what is, but if I may say, HV, to give you one final example, if we think of this pad as Planck as the doorway between say the ether, the non-physical, and then the physical up top. Think of, for example, when one has an idea for to start a business. The idea, as Plato had said as well, starts in the non-physical, and then as you up top work to make it happen, it goes through the Planck threshold and then becomes physical.
It's actually Planck times multiples of phi called phi cycle.
Is that where the two cones,
Physical.
the physical and
Phi
non-physical?
cycle.
Yes.
I love
Phi
that.
cycle. They always hide it in the words.
Is this where the two pine cones kissing? Is that the physical,
Exactly.
non-physical meeting at Planck?
By definition.
It's where they kiss. Is precisely Planck as example in the center of hydrogen. You take Planck times golden ratio, you get the radii of hydrogen, and that's the reason hydrogen makes gravity. And when you tune that to water and then DNA, you get soul.
So it's much more of a densities thing then, perhaps.
It is
buoyancy and density.
It is the point of wave agreement, the resonance that defines reality.
Yep. That's
I mean,
and that's basically
one more thing on lucid dreaming though. What I've experienced a couple of times in my life, and what I'm most impressed by and amazed by in the process is how physical everything feels. For whatever reason, my first inclination, the moment I realize that I am lucid, the moment I realize, oh, I'm in a dream. And it doesn't happen all the time. It's once in a blue moon sort of thing for me, but it's happened multiple times. But every single time I look around and I try to touch something and I go, oh my God, this wall feels like wall. It feels like on my hand, the ridges, the textural, the sensory experience, the physicality of it. I go, this is as real as anything I've ever felt in my real life. I have that sensation right away.
What you're calling real, that density, is the resistance to change of position, called inertia, the only definition of mass. And the reason you're feeling it, when you look at your hand, and that's how you trigger lucid dreaming, you start the do loop of implosive compression and you become more dense. So that's the reason you can lucid dream, is because you became centripetal and you got leverage on that array. But the fact that you have that experience is a very good sign.
I usually wake up pretty soon after that, and I do
it's
try.
Very cool.
And I try to
start a journal,
wake other people up. Like I've also noticed that I try to not wake up, but I try to, like, anybody passing me and they're just kind of like amorphous. I see them coming, but then they kind of disappear.
Good work.
I always try to stop them and go, hey, this is a dream. Can't you see that we're in a dream right now? But they and
eventually luciddreamteam.com form a team, and eventually you'll go through the heart of the sun together.
Wow. I did love the sun as a lens.
Exactly.
As a lens idea. I did think that was
a very implosive
good way to put
lens,
it.
Yeah. It's a squirt gun into the heart of the galaxy, literally.
This explains when people speak about lucid dreaming and then heading into the lens of the sun.
Exactly. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Carry Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun. It's the only way in or out of here. So you're stuck in a small kindergarten a long way from downtown until...
There's been some leaked footage that's gone online of from, say, 10, 15 years ago, where there's been just raw data files of what satellites in space have shown to be allegedly craft going in and out of the sun. So it would make perfect sense. It would make perfect sense.
Sun cruisers.
Right. Yeah, and without going into all the details, on my end, the physics and the calculations and the equations, as Dan and I talk about privately, substantiate that. But that's just where I stand on that.
So when are we building this thing and going through the sun?
If your ET arrived in heavy metal, they came from the wrong side of the tracks. But if they arrive through the heart of the sun, you should talk to them.
Right.
So is this something we're capable of building?
Yeah.
Well, we're capable of building a lucid dreaming cocoon, a pod, a Ba from the Ka, a Kesjan, a rainbow light body that goes through the heart of the sun. Osiris had to inhabit the sun for more than regulating the timing of the flooding of the Nile. There was more to it. And by the way, that was Enki.
And that's stronger than anything physical. That's literally, if we go back to that example of taking from the immaterial into the material, there would just basically be there would need to be enough of us in coherence or in for example, phase locking in order for that to occur. So then the what we call what a lot of people call nonsensical or imaginary ends up going from the imaginary state into the physical, and it beats anything that would actually be metal or anything solid here.
Crow, I'll cut you off, please.
I've actually acquired a really big hydrogen alpha solar telescope, and I'm aiming to begin doing with the sun what I did with the moon. But I was going to suggest to you, you don't dream, go get organic raw honey and take a big spoonful before you go to sleep. You'll dream your butt off.
Yeah.
I think I was interviewing an Aboriginal woman named Munya, and she said, "My dear, how do you think you got the cliche sweet dreams?" Apparently the Aborigines knew all about it, and here I thought I was so clever with my honey trick. But in a way, I feel like we've kind of sidestepped a crucial component of where we are right now. There are people with bad intent, backed by whatever you want to feel it's negative, whatever it's backed by. I can't speak to grays, I can't speak to aliens, but I can speak to what's going on. They're going for the whole enchilada, and they're trying to kneecap as many as they can along the way. The people who fell for their shots, all the deaths that we've seen, they're nonsensical science, their linear histories, their systems that require you to register everything. But right now we're at a crossroad. The digital money is coming, and we can sit here and wax philosophic about what AI is all day, but the problem with AI is they have it. That's the problem with AI.
Until we know what soul is, we can't defend it.
Well, my point would be is they have some powerful weapons to continue their push to control this place. And until we begin to look around with love in our hearts and help those around us detect and avoid the deception and not take the offers, because everything is an offer, we are not doing justice to our fellow human beings. If we jump off the ship because we can swim and we leave the others behind who need life preservers, then we deserve to drown just like they will.
But
we have an obligation here.
Yeah, well said. And the definition of success is, does it feed the aura of the kids? And it's measurable.
The kids aren't going to have an aura if they're inoculated, if they're turned into slaves, if they're glued to digital gaming systems, if they never go outside, if we make videos about Generation Z making fun of them because how idiotic they are. We're not holding up our end here.
Well said.
The real pressing thing that's going on is we are inches away from one of the final runs at total control. One part of it's going to come out as money, and part of it's going to come at us as AI. And the power of AI is,
and they will be soulless. Exactly.
Again, why would anyone over 100 years ago have worked towards this outcome? There's two possible questions: because they were so dedicated, they did their part for their family or whoever, or they didn't die. There's two possible answers there.
These parasites there's thousands of planets with a similar problem. This is an archetype, and we get to enjoy that resistance because that's precisely what makes the soul rewarding. We needed that resistance. Let's not complain. Let's enjoy it.
That's how I look at it as well. I don't bear the burden that Crow does. And we thank you for it, man, because you're doing a hell of a job. If we'd send anyone into the trenches, it'd be you, because you've stood up and stood for it. And this is where I've gotten with my own place with it as well. It got too heavy for me. Now, call me a coward in that respect. I got to a point where my service could be better done with those that were on the side that didn't need to be scared out of it, and that I could ease into this. But there's absolutely a much higher percentage of the sect of folks that need to be woken up that you provide that service for. Because as the Da Vinci quote is something that really, really tethers me to this idea, is that there are three classes of people: those who can see when shown, and those who just can't fucking see. And so it's the ones that can't fucking see are the ones that our discernment is necessary, in my mind, to be able to delineate the uses of energy on our part, and to focus on those that can see and prop them up as well, and bring them with us to show those who can be shown when shown, who can see when shown.
What I would add to that is I consider what's going on like a great winnowing. there are going to be plenty of people who can't be shown, who aren't going to make it. And that's just the facts. When you go out into a field of deer, you are looking at a number of deer that will be dead next week because nature will take them. And that's just the facts. That's the truth of nature. But to live the example, to try to instill common sense, to try to make people realize what they were granted with their life in this place is really the game that's being taken away. You've been convinced that you have been given nothing. You've been convinced that every lie that you've ever heard is true. And you've been convinced that humans aren't that special.
And by definition, you're the same thing they're saying for you to not believe in is fueling the thing that is densifying us, for lack of a better
word. And the minute you can touch your own bliss, you have the cure. You can go back to that every time. So if you can enable to touch your own bliss, then the radio's hooked up and nothing can stop it. That's why I teach the kids to have bliss.
If a powerful organization spends all its time blocking the ability for people to recognize there is even bliss, then the amount of bliss that gets touched becomes negligible, which is where we are now.
That's true.
I find that the more challenging it is to discover, the more greater the discovery. And so therefore the amplification of bliss, even though it's a lower in percentage, has a higher amplitude because it was sought in a hero's journey, sort of. I like it. How I view it.
I like it.
I like that you brought it back to the purpose, the reality. There is something true and pure about what the topic of conversation is what is reality, and the one thing that we can all agree on is that we are being tricked. We are being manipulated. We are being lied to. We are being conned all day, every day about everything. I wrote down one thing, just the internal combustion engine, as simple as that. We humans have to interact with automobiles. It's the way of modern life. And what does an automobile do? The standard automobile that we typically interact with, not talking about Teslas and hybrids, which is another con because anyway, we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But there is an energetic trickery happening where we believe that this is how things are fueled. This is the only way it's done. And it's not. It's
the human heart is driven by something else.
Correct. It's absolutely ridiculous that today we are still powering our vehicles with what we are told to be is dinosaur goo, which is another lie. It is an absolute onion of deception.
The main thing is that human beings are special, and we have been treated as if we are not, and we've been trained to treat each other as if we are not. Yeah. And until we break that cycle, and until you can make time to help someone you don't even like, we're going to be in dire straits. And right now we are a hair's breadth from the next big ploy here. And since so many people woke up to their bullshit deception in COVID, that things like that are not going to work as well. But what that implies is that they're going to be willing to Mad Max us. They control the systems. They control the food delivery. They control many, many, many things. But what they don't control is our ability to accept their offers. Right. And common sense and treating one another decently and having a concern and recognizing the truth that nature provides us and the fact that we are not growing up, but we can grow up, will allow us to combat what's going on. 50, 60 years from now, all created things are going to see their end. This is no different. But who wants to be slaved out for 100 years or whatever it might be, 50 years? Nobody does. And how much loss of life and how damaged will DNA strands be and how far will the infertility go that's been going on since the 70s? It's time where we need to focus on what's important here. All these things are great. Yeah, it would be great if we could get everyone to lucid dream. But if nobody has a chance to even think about lucid dreaming, then what have we gained? And this is
about really dreaming too, real quick. THC diminishes the human's ability to dream. I've noticed that in my life in times where I take in certain chemicals. I've noticed that my ability to dream is completely. So just if you're out there and you smoke or you take in whatever form and you don't dream, that's just one thing to try. And it's not like you have to quit completely, but just see if there's an effect when nights or complete cyclical times that you don't take in those chemicals.
It's wonderful. Down the honey, and I've got honey, Crow. We take it all the time for the allergies out here, just for the local raw honey. It's huge. Absolutely.
The raw honey, a spoonful of crystallized raw honey before bedtime, and I guarantee you will dream your butt off.
Thank you.
And it's a starting point. It's a starting point if you don't dream, and maybe it will help you along.
Well, cool. Dave and I'll do it tonight.
Dave, with their last question, or how are we doing here?
I was going to say
we can wrap it up here.
I was going to say because I have to jump on a couple of things myself. But
I just wanted to thank everyone. If we can, just in a couple of brief sentences here, let's go back around and let's just say something that we're looking forward to. Let's give folks hope. Let's lift them up, and then we're going to close it out. From the bottom of my heart, I'm going to give y'all the last word. From the bottom of my heart here, thank you so much for this discussion. So much was achieved here. Balance in the conversation, which was crucial. And thank y'all so much for really going for it here with us. So Positive Solutions, I'm grateful. All the ways again for everyone are going to be located down in the show notes, guys. Make sure you check that out. And thank you, the audience, for taking this ride with us. We really appreciate that. So HV, if you don't mind, what gets you out of bed in the morning and keeps you moving?
I really do think that there is an awakening happening. To kind of piggyback off what Crow said, there needs to be, there's a few people that can see, and there's a few people that are aware of this, but the vast majority of people aren't even aware that they're being tricked and lied to on that. It's important that more and more see, and I think that our capacity to comprehend and recognize the deception is growing, and I see it all the time. I see it in my DMs alone. It's just, I see people asking questions that potentially have never been asked before by themselves or as a collective. We are beginning to question in a way that I think is new, I think is radical, and that really gets me out of bed in the morning to know that I am not just shouting into a vacuum with absolutely no effect, that these ways of seeing the world, this new lens that I have found for myself and that I kind of share, really allows us to see the world clear. 2020 they say is clear vision, and I got my clear vision and my awakening in 2020, and just to be able to see how that magnifies, it really heartens me. Realize Radio has been it's a micro, that's my kind of pet project, and Patreon community at Realize Radio on just lots of discussions on a lot of topics we talked about here. And that has, to see that build in its own small but very organic and real way, the questions that are being asked there, the discussions that are happening there, there's something happening. There's something very powerful. We are powerful, energetic beings in an energetic realm. And I think that we really do render the life ahead of us. I think we influence this place more than it influences us. And I heard a great quote, don't fight back, fight forward. Fight forward. And I think that's kind of what we're doing. And we're not even fighting. It doesn't even need to be a fight. It just needs to be a harnessing of our energetic, of our energy. And I think that our attention is, again, the most precious, our human energy, which is measured in joules, like a jewel, like a crown jewel, but it's spelled differently. But we're just really special. We are so special, and we're so powerful, and we need to get to it. We need to learn it. We need to learn it right now before it's too late. Yeah.
And Human Vibration's doing some wonderful work. Her and I have a conscious parenting community that we're working on here, full of homeschool options, solutions, things like that for parents that are very over the matrix. So those type solutions, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. Anybody looking to do that, email her or I about this, and we've got that community growing. So thank you so much for joining us. Crow 777, sir, thank you so much for your time, man. What gets you out of bed every morning? Keeps you moving?
We have to stand up. We have to try to make the best out of our generation. And it's been a few generations since anybody was concerned with making the best out of their generation. We've been beaten down. We've been deceived. We face corporations with unlimited resources that have intentions that don't include the concerns of living men and women. And in that, I would point out that in one way, each generation faces a version of what we're doing, but our generation faces a dire version of what we're doing. The results of what happens with our generation will echo on for a while. And while all created things will see their end, I will leave you with this following idea from a book called Hagakure, also known as the Book of Samurai. It is said that what is called the spirit of an age is something to which one cannot return. That this spirit gradually dissipates is due to the world's coming to an end. For this reason, Although one would like to change today's world back to the spirit of 100 years ago or more, it cannot be done. Thus, it is important to make the best out of every generation.
Oh,
thank you. Dr. Dan Winter, thank you so much for joining us here. So please, we'll get you out of bed every morning. Keeps you moving. Keeps that smile on your face. Look at that.
Yeah, actually, I'm currently a little bit excited that I think that as soon as people wake up to one simple understanding, which is why objects fall to the ground. If you take the new equation for hydrogen, it looks like a rose. So the reason hydrogen makes gravity is that implosion. Now, once you learn why objects fall to the ground, hint, Einstein didn't, NASA didn't, Stephen Hawking did not have a clue. Once you learn why objects fall to the ground, then you can learn why life force exists. You can learn why bliss exists. You can learn why soul exists. You can learn why immortality exists. You can learn why action at a distance exists. All of that is possible just after you figured out why objects fall to the ground. The top-down view of hydrogen as a rose. It's called plankfire.com. So learn why objects fall to the ground, and suddenly everything is open to you. You are empowered because you can inhabit the array. That excites me.
That's awesome and empowering. So let's do it. That's our committed goal. Let's learn why do objects fall to the ground. That's the question for the next one, and we're really going to dissect it. Dave, give us the last word if you don't mind and sign us off for this, the 200th episode. And again, thank you all for listening, for being here, and for participating.
What gets me out of bed in the morning? Heart, and that others have it. That's it.
Nice.
That's it. Because then yeah. Standing on the shoulders of what everyone else said here as well too. So for me, it would just be Generation Z, ZED on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and of course patreon.com/Generation Z, where we have similar type discussions, except not always with as fantastic of a panel in our member side and all of that. So I would just leave it at that.
And Dave is leading quite a team. It's wonderful.
To be divulged in the future.
Absolutely incredible. Just want to thank those Titans of Insight for joining us for this conversation for the 200th episode of Expanding Reality. All the ways to find our participants, as well as any links that they desire to be included, are going to be included down below in the show description. So make sure that you follow down there to find out more about these incredible people. Just want to, again, say personally from the bottom of my heart to them, as well as all of you, for this 200th episode and getting here. Thank you all so much. Now, moving forward, a lot of big changes going to occur, all of them exciting and wonderful. To find out more about that, check the show description down there that reads expandingrealitypodcast.com, and don't be left out on any of the details. Now, that's all we have for this one, guys. So we're just going to keep it nice and short and sweet on this. All of our affiliate links and everything else are always located down in the show description. Help yourself to those. Beyond anything else, though, go out into this incredibly beautiful and mysterious place, and y'all pick up a piece of litter. Be nice to everybody that you come across, please and thank you. Go ahead and get out of that left-hand lane if you've got someone behind you wanting to pass. And of course, beyond anything else and above all, go out into this beautifully mysterious and amazing place, whatever the fuck this thing is, guys. And y'all just be good to one another. Thank you so much for watching, listening, engaging, participating, creating, and just being the coolest sons of bitches ever. We'll see you next time.